My name is Camille Hartley, and at 48, I've learned that silence can cut sharper than pride. I've spent 20 years in offices like this: glass walls, gray carpets, people who talk too loud because they're scared of being invisible. But that morning in downtown Seattle, under a sky the color of wet steel, I wasn't invisible anymore. The boardroom smelled of espresso and rain-soaked coats. Across from me sat Brandon Laird, the CEO's son, 30 years old, born to a corner office he never earned. His smile was polished and empty, like chrome on a toy car. To my right, the investors from Titan Tech adjusted their cuffs and powered on tablets. I'd prepared this meeting for weeks, though no one would admit that out loud. Brandon leaned back in his chair and pointed at me without looking. "Get us coffee," he said. The room went still. One of the Titan Tech lawyers frowned, clearly unsure if he'd misheard. A man at the end of the table, older, deliberate, tilted his head. "Who is she?" Brandon's grin widened. "Camille, administrative staff, tiny as a candy." I met his eyes. Calm. "Give me 5 minutes, sir." He laughed under his breath, the kind of laugh that makes other people check their shoes. I opened my laptop, the same one I'd used to write the original compliance frameworks, the same system Brandon thought he'd locked me out of. A few keystrokes later, a file appeared: a signed verification of intellectual property ownership, time-stamped, notarized. My name was printed in black, clean letters: co-inventor, core algorithm module. I attached it to a short email and sent it directly to Titan Tech's lead counsel. I didn't say a word. I just watched the lawyer's face as he opened the document. He read once, then again, slower this time. The change in his expression moved like a ripple through the glass table. Finally, he looked at Brandon. "Mr. Laird," he said evenly, "are you selling us a company she essentially owns?" For a moment, even the rain outside seemed to stop. Brandon's mouth opened, then closed. The investors whispered. Someone's pen rolled off the table and clattered to the floor. And as the silence thickened, I sat very still, letting it stretch until it belonged entirely to me. 2 weeks earlier, 2 weeks before that meeting, everything still looked harmless. The office sat above a sushi bar near Lake Union, all flickering lights and half-finished prototypes. Back then, Laird Dynamics was 4 engineers, 1 dream, and me, the woman they hired to handle admin. Richard Laird, the founder, had shaken my hand on the first day and said, "Just keep us organized." "Camille, you'll save us before we even know we need saving." He was right, though none of them noticed when it happened. At first, my desk was a folding table between a printer and a pile of empty ramen cups. The engineers spoke in acronyms and caffeine. When the first investor asked for an expense report, I built one from scratch. When the next asked for proof of patent filings, I stayed until midnight translating the team's sketches into legal descriptions. "Camille, you actually wrote this in patent format?" Richard asked, reading over my shoulder. "It needed structure," I said, "and correct spelling." He laughed, but he signed it. That document became the company's first provisional patent. My name appeared in the filing, not out of vanity, but because legal required a verified contributor. Richard shrugged. "Easier that way. You're already ghostwriting our logic." From there, it spiraled. Every compliance form, every HR policy, every funding contract had a trace of me buried in its code. I created systems that no one else understood. When the lawyers called, they asked for the woman who translates engineer into English. The office grew first 10 people, then 50. We moved downtown, traded folding tables for glass desks. Richard would still call across the floor. "Camille, what clause keeps us alive this week?" I'd answer with a smile and hand him the right file. He liked to joke. "Camille's the reason we don't get sued." And he wasn't wrong. But success has a short memory. The newer hires never saw the basement years. They saw a quiet woman who typed fast and asked few questions, the one who kept the lights on but didn't care to stand in them, until someone decided she didn't matter anymore. The first time I saw Brandon Laird after his return from Stanford, He walked into the office like a man rehearsing for a role. Expensive jacket, careless confidence, the kind of smile that expected applause before he'd earned it. Richard clapped him on the shoulder. "Everyone, my son's back to help modernize operations." Brandon gave me a quick once-over. "Camille." "Right. You've been running the same system for, 10 years, 11, I said. He grinned. "Then it's overdue for disruption." That word disruption became his anthem. In meetings, he talked about streamlining processes, vertical integration, and reducing redundancy. He'd toss those phrases around like confetti, as if vocabulary could replace understanding. The engineers nodded, half afraid to seem outdated. A week later, I noticed something small. My access to the patent dashboard was gone. When I asked it, they said, "Brandon approved the new permissions list." I found him in the conference room, scribbling diagrams on the whiteboard. "You removed my access," I said. He turned, marker still in hand. "We're reallocating tasks. I need clarity on roles. Admin shouldn't touch compliance." "I built compliance," I said quietly. He smiled. "Exactly. You've done your part. Time for a leaner structure." By Friday, my title changed from operations liaison to administrative support. HR called it a lateral move. My calendar emptied overnight. Projects I'd managed were reassigned to younger hires with shinier resumes. Richard stopped by my desk once, standing awkwardly beside the flickering printer. "Camille, don't take this personally. It's just a restructuring." I nodded, of course. But when he walked away, I stayed still, listening to the hum of the machine burning another misprint. I could smell the faint sweetness of melted toner, the scent of something valuable turning useless. Brandon passed behind me, phone pressed to his ear. "We need to show Titan Tech we're agile," he said, glancing in my direction. "That means trimming the old scaffolding." I kept my eyes on the screen, fingers motionless over the keyboard. Words rose in my throat but never escaped. I'd learned long ago silence, when sharpened, can cut deeper than rage. I started spending more time in the filing room, a narrow hallway that smelled like ink and dust. No one came there anymore. Everything had gone digital except me. Each night, after the interns left, I printed audit logs, patent drafts, and approval chains. I labeled every folder by date and initials. It looked routine, almost clerical, but every page I touched held a piece of truth no one else bothered to keep. One evening, Lena, a new hire barely out of college, stopped by with a coffee in hand. "You're really printing all that Brandon says we're going paperless." I smiled. "Brandon says a lot of things." She laughed nervously, unsure if I was joking. Behind her, I could hear Brandon's voice echoing from the open office. He was talking to the product team loud enough for everyone to hear. "When Titan Tech signs, we're done scraping for cash. I'll finally have equity that means something," he said. "Dad promised me control once the deal closes. I'll own the place." Lena rolled her eyes. "He actually said that out loud. He likes an audience," I replied, sliding another document into its sleeve. I printed until the hum of the machines became steady enough to think. Each sheet that landed in the tray felt heavier than paper, like evidence. Approval threads, version histories, notes from engineers I'd translated years ago, all with metadata that tied back to me. At 9 o'clock, the office lights dimmed automatically. I stayed. The copier warmed again as I fed in the next batch contracts, design logs, revisions stamped with my initials. Brandon passed the door, glanced inside. "Still filing, just catching up," I said. He smirked. "You're old school." "Camille." "Don't get too attached. Titan Tech's lawyers don't care about paper." He left before I could answer. I stacked the last folder, ran my finger over the tab where my name appeared, faint but visible. Paper might not matter to him, but paper remembers everything. The pre-acquisition meeting took place on a Tuesday morning. Brandon had insisted it be held in the main boardroom, his stage, not mine. Titan Tech's delegation filled one side of the table. Richard sat at the head, fingers drumming a rhythm he didn't notice. Brandon began with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Before we start," he said, gesturing toward me. "Camille here can take notes or grab coffee if anyone needs." I kept my voice steady. "Actually, I'll just listen. You may need me later." A few of the Titan Tech attorneys glanced up. Brandon laughed. "We'll manage without admin commentary. Thanks." They dove into numbers, projections, patents his rehearsed script. I listened until I couldn't anymore. The moment he claimed sole authorship over the sensor module framework. I opened my laptop. My pulse stayed calm, like I'd been saving this breath for years. "Give me 5 minutes," I said. Brandon frowned. "Excuse me, I didn't repeat it." My fingers moved faster than my thoughts. Retrieving a secured document from the internal archive, an authentication log verifying co-inventorship on the wearable sensor algorithm. My name sat beside his, time-stamped, verified by the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I forwarded it to Titan Tech's lead counsel. "You might want this for your records," I said quietly. The lawyer opened the file on her tablet. The room fell into a hush so thick it pressed against the walls. She whispered something to the associate beside her. Both began scrolling fast, eyes wide. Brandon forced a laugh. "There's got to be some mix-up." Richard's brow creased. "Camille." "What is this documentation?" I said. "From our filings, 3 years ago." I kept the originals. The lawyer looked up at Richard, then at Brandon. "This signature is hers," she said. "Legally, she's a co-inventor on multiple assets included in your valuation." Brandon's face drained of color. Richard sat back, silent. I closed my laptop slowly. The air felt electric, charged with everything they'd chosen not to see. 5 minutes had passed, and nothing in that room would ever be the same again. 2 days after that meeting, the first email arrived. Subject line verification request intellectual property authorship. It came from Titan Tech's legal department. Polite, precise. "Please confirm your contribution to the following filings for record-keeping purposes." They listed project codes I hadn't seen in years, sensor calibration modules, adaptive firmware logic, compliance auto routines. All mine. I read it twice before answering. My reply was short, confirmed, documentation attached. Then I attached everything: the drafts, approval chains, timestamps, the original signatures. I didn't copy Richard or Brandon. I didn't need to. By Thursday, the storm broke. I could feel it before anyone said a word. Conversations in the hallway dropped when I passed. Meeting invites vanished from my calendar. Brandon's door stayed closed for hours, his voice muffled and sharp behind it. That afternoon, Richard called me in. His tie was loosened, his confidence was not. "Camille," he began. "Titan Tech is reviewing. Ownership clarifications. You might have gotten an email." I responded. I said. His eyes flickered. "They say your name appears on, what was it, 40-something filings? 43. I answered. He exhaled through his nose. "You understand how this looks? We're about to close a deal worth over $1 billion, and now it looks accurate," I said. He stared at me for a long moment, then rubbed his temple. "Brandon says this must be a clerical issue." "It isn't." Outside his office, Brandon paced, phone glued to his ear. I heard his voice crack through the glass. "Fix it, Dad. Tell them she was admin support. It's semantics." Richard shut the door halfway, like that would muffle the sound. "We'll handle this internally," he said. "I already sent the originals." I replied, "There's nothing left to handle." The following morning, Titan Tech froze the acquisition pending verification. The announcement went company-wide. Slack channels turned silent. Brandon didn't show up to work. Richard did, but he walked past me without a word. By evening, legal threads were flying faster than anyone could read them. Every document, every signature, every line of ownership pointed back to one name: mine. And it wasn't going away. HR asked me to come in for a clarification session. The invitation sounded harmless, the way poison sometimes looks like water. When I arrived, Brandon was already there, sitting beside Kara from HR. Both smiled too brightly. The glass walls reflected their nerves. "Camille," Kara began, her voice syrupy. "We just need to clean up a few inconsistencies in the paperwork for the Titan Tech review. Nothing serious." Brandon leaned forward, sleeves rolled up, pretending we were teammates. "Yeah, just a quick fix. You know how lawyers overreact. If you could sign a short statement confirming your role was administrative support only, it'll save everyone a headache." I kept my hands folded. "Support." He nodded. "You coordinated documents, formatted filings, stuff like that. You didn't actually, invent anything." The words hung there. For a moment, I thought of every late night, every patent draft written over cold takeout, every clause I'd corrected to keep the company alive. Then I opened my folder, without a word. I slid a printed filing across the table. Co-inventor Camille Hartley, signed by the original engineers, time-stamped, certified. Brandon's grin faltered. Kara reached for it like she could hide the evidence just by touching it. Before either of them spoke, the conference screen blinked to life. Titan Tech's lead counsel appeared, dark suit, unreadable face. "Good afternoon," she said. I was asked to join for verification. Brandon straightened, his voice too eager. Perfect timing. "We're resolving a small clerical misunderstanding. Camille's role was more administrative than the lawyer interrupted. I've reviewed the document she just shared. It's not administrative, it's authorship. Her signature appears on multiple co-inventor filings. That makes her an intellectual property owner." Brandon froze. Kara's pen slipped from her hand and hit the table with a small click. "This isn't cleanup," the lawyer continued evenly. "It's ownership." Silence settled over the room. The hum of the projector filled the space where Brandon's confidence used to live. I gathered my papers, slid them neatly back into the folder, and stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The evidence had already spoken louder than either of them ever could. By Monday morning, Brandon was gone from Slack. His profile picture vanished, his calendar cleared, no announcement, no goodbye. Just silence, like he'd been erased by the same system he once used to erase others. The office moved strangely, half-whispered and jittery. Legal walked faster, phones pressed to their ears. The acquisition, everyone said, was on hold. No one explained why, but I didn't need to ask. That afternoon, I received a call from Titan Tech's lead counsel, the same woman from the video meeting. Her tone was cool, professional, almost kind. "Ms. Hartley, we'd like to invite you to a direct briefing. Our team needs clarity on the intellectual property chain. Are you available tomorrow?" "Yes," I said. "Excellent. We'll arrange transport to our Seattle office. This conversation stays between us until we finalize our findings." I hung up and sat still for a long moment. It wasn't triumph, I felt it was gravity. The quiet kind that comes when you realize the ground has shifted under everyone else, and you're the only one still standing. When I left my desk that evening, Richard was waiting by the elevator. His shoulders slumped, his voice tired. "Camille," he said softly, "I never meant for things to go this far." I met his eyes. "You let him run the place like a toy. You saw it." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "He wanted to prove himself." "I thought that it wouldn't cost you everything he didn't answer." The elevator chimed. But neither of us moved. For the first time, he looked smaller than the man who once joked I was the company's backbone. "I need this deal to close," he said finally. "If there's any way you can steady the ship, I'd appreciate it." I nodded once. "Then let's tell the truth." The doors slid open. Richard stepped back. I stepped inside. The next morning, I would walk into a room where no one could talk over me again. Titan Tech's conference room overlooked the bay, but no one noticed the water that morning. The table was lined with folders, each stamped with a blue seal and a single name, mine. The lead counsel from Titan Tech adjusted her glasses. 47 filings, she said, sliding the stack forward, all verified, all listing Camille Hartley as co-inventor or lead contributor. These documents form the backbone of Laird Dynamics' valuation. Richard sat at the far end of the table, pale, his hands clasped tight. Brandon leaned back, forcing a laugh that came out thin. That's exaggerated. She probably signed routine forms clerical stuff. The lawyer didn't look up. Each filing contains technical authorship and original language. These are not clerical. Richard swallowed hard, flipping through the pages. His voice cracked when he spoke. These patents, Camille. This is the entire sensor line, our adaptive firmware, our compliance engine, everything. I stayed silent. Titan Tech's lawyer continued, her tone even. Without Ms. Hartley's consent, the sale cannot proceed. She is legally entitled to authorship rights and corresponding equity. Any transfer of ownership without her approval constitutes misrepresentation. Brandon slammed his hand on the table. You can't be serious. She's just Richard cut him off. Enough. He looked at me, his voice low, almost pleading. Camille, we can't afford to lose this deal. What do you need? I met his eyes. I don't need anything. I just want accuracy. The lawyer handed him a single-page document, a corrective transfer. It grants Ms. Hartley controlling rights over the company's intellectual property portfolio. Once signed, the acquisition can resume. Richard hesitated, then signed. The pen left a slow, shaky line. Brandon stared at the paper, his mouth open but empty of words. The same man who once called me tiny as a candy now watched the company's ownership shift in silence. I reached for the document, folded it once, and placed it in my folder. Titan Tech's counsel stood. Congratulations, Ms. Hartley. You now control the assets we're buying. The room was quiet, except for the soft scrape of chairs as everyone rose except Brandon, who couldn't move at all. A week later, I walked back into the same glass boardroom. The skyline outside hadn't changed, but everything inside had. My badge read, Chief Innovation Officer. The folders on the table carried my name in print, not as a footnote but as a signature. Brandon's office sat empty, blinds half drawn, desk cleared to the grain. No one mentioned him. People had learned that silence could be more merciful than gossip. Titan Tech's executive team arrived precisely on time. Their CEO, a tall woman with silver hair and the calm of someone who'd built empires, extended her hand. You're the one we came for, she said, not the pitch decks, not the noise. You, I shook her hand. Then let's make something worth the ink. Richard sat beside her, quieter than I'd ever seen him. When the contracts came around, he didn't speak, just watched as I signed each page clean, deliberate strokes, every initial, every date, another layer of proof that patience had teeth. After the meeting, I stayed behind. The sunlight hit the chrome coffee machine by the wall, the same one Brandon had pointed to when he told me to fetch drinks. I walked over and switched it on. The old grinder sputtered to life. Richard stepped up beside me. You won, he said. It was never a competition, I replied. He nodded, eyes down. You're the reason this company still exists. I was always that reason, I said softly. The machine hissed. The smell of coffee filled the air. I poured a cup, set it on the counter, and left it there, a small offering to the past. Outside, Titan Tech's CEO waited by the elevator. We'll announce the acquisition next week, she said. You'll be presented as the visionary behind the framework. Accurate credit, at last. Accuracy suits me, I said. As the doors closed, I looked once more at the boardroom, the polished table, the empty chairs, the stack of documents that had rewritten everything. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't leaked a thing. I had just written, signed, archived, and waited. And in the end, the paper spoke louder than any of them ever did. My name is Marin Tilden, and at 52, I've learned how to stay calm while everything burns. 15 years in operations will do that to you. You stop flinching at chaos. You start cataloging it. That morning, the chaos had a face, Brian Keller, our CEO, stood across the conference table with a rehearsed smile and a speech about strategic realignment. His cologne was sharper than his logic. HR sat beside him, eyes fixed on a legal pad like it could shield her from the fallout. "Marin," he said smoothly, "we're streamlining to survive these budget cuts. But there's an option. If you're willing to adapt, take on something more hands-on, you can stay on part-time. Maybe help maintenance, restock supplies, mop the floors. It'll show leadership that you're a team player." For a moment, the world narrowed to the hum of the air vent. My nameplate was still on the table, polished the way I used to polish every system in this place. And now he wanted me to polish the floors. I looked at him. "You want me to mop the floors?" I said quietly. He smiled. "It's an opportunity to stay connected. Think of it as cross-functional synergy." That's when something inside me clicked into place. Not rage, not shock, just a strange, clean finality. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick blue binder. Edges worn from years of revisions, every process, vendor, and contingency lived inside that binder. I had written it. It was the spine of the company he thought he owned. I set it down in front of him. "Here's everything you'll need to survive the cuts," I said. He blinked, confused. "What's this?" "The book," I told him, standing. "You should probably read it." And then I walked out, heels steady, heartbeat slower than it should have been. 3 days later, I sat across from Brian Keller again in a conference room 15 floors higher at a $500 million acquisition meeting, only this time, I wasn't the one being dismissed. The binder was about to open itself. When I got home that night, Seattle rain had already smeared the city into silver streaks outside my window. My apartment smelled faintly of stale coffee and cardboard, the scent of endings. I set the box from Delwyn Systems on the floor. 15 years of loyalty, reduced to office debris, a cracked mug that once said "World's Most Reliable," a row of ID badges with dates that marked every rebrand, and printouts from systems I'd written when the company still believed in building instead of bleeding. I sat cross-legged and opened one folder. My handwriting filled every margin notes, corrections, reminders, tiny lifelines. I had spent years cleaning up after other people's shortcuts, staying late while new executives promised innovation and left me to patch the wreckage. 6 CEOs, 4 rebrands, endless speeches about fresh vision. None of them remembered who actually kept the servers alive when the lights flickered. The silence of my apartment felt heavier than their boardroom. I poured a glass of wine that tasted like cardboard, too, and stared at the blue binder I had left behind. Somewhere, Keller was probably flipping through it, pretending to understand what he'd just lost. My laptop blinked awake. One unread email. Subject, still interested in consulting. The name Blake Harlan took me a second to place. We'd met years ago at a vendor summit in Denver. He had a sharp mind and a habit of remembering the quiet ones. I clicked the message open. "Hope you're well. Marin. My firm's handling several acquisitions in the tech sector. Let me know if you're open to part-time advisory work. Nothing heavy, just eyes on the ground for due diligence." I stared at the words, reading them twice. Advisory work. Acquisitions. My pulse steadied in a way it hadn't in days. I typed 2 words, "Let's talk," then pressed send. Outside. The rain kept tapping the glass like a clock running backward, each drop pulling me away from the humiliation I'd left behind. Somewhere in the city, a door I hadn't expected had just cracked open, and I was already on my feet. Blake called the next morning, his voice exactly as I remembered, smooth, careful, always carrying more than it said. "Marin Tilden," he began, a hint of surprise under the professionalism. "It's been what, 5 years, closer to 6. I said, pulling my sweater tighter around my shoulders. "You still collecting people from vendor lists?" He laughed quietly. "Only the useful ones. Listen, my firm Marlowe Strategic Holdings, we're running due diligence for a major acquisition. Could use someone who understands the unglamorous side of tech operations. You still fluent in disaster prevention?" I wrote the dictionary. I said. He liked that. I could hear it in the pause. "Perfect. It's short-term, Flexible hours, remote access, advisory pay rate. You'd be our eyes on the architecture. I opened my laptop. Who's the target? He hesitated just long enough for my pulse to shift. You've probably heard of them. Delwyn Systems. The air between us went quiet. My throat tightened before I could speak. You're serious. Very. Their parent company wants a clean transition, but early flags are messy old systems, outdated contracts, audit gaps. We need someone who knows how a company like that hides its cracks. I leaned back, watching the rain slide down the glass. I don't just know the cracks. Blake. I built the walls. He didn't reply right away. Then you're exactly who we need. A file landed in my inbox seconds later. Mutual non-disclosure agreement. I scrolled through it, line by line. The clauses were clean, the tone aggressive. Marlowe played hardball. I respected that. I typed my name, signed the digital line, and hit submit. For a moment, the reflection on my screen showed my own face steady, calm, different from the woman who'd walked out of Keller's office. Welcome aboard, Blake said. I'll send you the access packet. The call ended. I sat there, fingers resting on the keys, realizing the universe had just handed me something sharper than revenge. It had given me context. Delwyn Systems had deleted me from their payroll. But now, I'd been hired to read them like a book and mark every lie in red ink. 2 days later, I was inside the system again, this time through Marlowe's portal. Blake had sent me a set of sanitized vendor files. Everything Delwyn had provided for preliminary review. It was thin, careless, exactly what I expected from a company run on appearances. He joined our call late that night. Start with the vendor exclusivity agreements, he said. Their counsel insists everything's transferable. We just need to verify it. I muted my mic, opened the first document, and felt the familiar rhythm of my own past contract codes. Clause indexes, cross-references. I had built this language once, and as I scrolled, I found the ghost of my handwriting in the formatting indentations only I ever used, spacing that legal always told me to fix. Page 4, Section B. The words hit me like a hand closing around my throat. In the event of acquisition or asset transfer, all associated vendor rights become non-transferable unless renegotiated under original pricing and mutual consent. My cursor hovered over the line. I remembered the fight conference room 9, fluorescent lights humming, a junior attorney named Foster insisting it was too restrictive for scalability. I had refused to remove it, protect the vendors, protect the company. I'd said, future-proof or future regret. He'd rolled his eyes. Keller had sided with him halfway, and somehow I'd gotten it through. I never thought it would matter. But now, in the context of a $500 million sale, that single paragraph was a detonator. Every exclusive contract under it would collapse the moment ownership changed hands. Blake's voice broke the silence. Find anything I unmuted. Clause 7.3, 2017. Vendor exclusivity, non-transferable without renegotiation. He exhaled slowly. That could delay the acquisition by months. Or kill it, I said. He didn't speak for a moment. You wrote it, didn't you? Yes, I said. I wrote all of it. My screen reflected a faint smile. I didn't recognize something between vindication and calm. Blake finally whispered, Then I think we just found our leverage. I leaned closer to the glow of the document, the words steady as pulse lines. Justice had always been in the fine print. Curiosity has a sound. It's the faint hum of a habit you thought you'd buried. That night, it sounded like the clicking of keys. I typed the old web address by instinct, the one I used every morning for 15 years. Delwyn Vendor Access Portal. The login screen hadn't changed. My hands moved without permission email. Password. 2-step prompt. The system blinked once and let me in. I froze. My credentials were still active, not administrator level, but full consultant clearance. Someone in IT had forgotten to deactivate my account. 15 years of loyalty, and they couldn't even delete me properly. My dashboard opened to a list of files, color-coded, neatly time-stamped. I hovered over a folder marked Master Vendor Contracts updated 6 weeks ago. It wasn't hacking. It wasn't theft. It was an open door someone else had left unlocked. I downloaded the documents, saving them into Marlowe's secure drive. When the transfer completed, I logged out cleanly, cleared the cache, and shut the laptop. A message from Blake arrived a few minutes later. Blake: any luck me found the current vendor list. You'll want to check clauses 14 and 7. They're still binding. Blake: you got that legally, me. My profile's still live. Their oversight, not mine. He sent back a single word. Perfect. I leaned back, staring into the dark reflection on the screen. I didn't feel triumphant, only steady, like a ghost walking familiar hallways, unseen, untouched, still holding the keys to every locked door. Somewhere inside that building, Keller would be sleeping soundly, convinced his world was under control. Meanwhile, the architecture he'd taken for granted was whispering my name through every clause and contract. I'd spent years building systems that couldn't break. Now those same systems were listening to me again. Before shutting down for the night, I opened the last document, the one with my digital signature at the bottom. A strange calm settled over me. They had erased me from payroll, from meetings, from memory. But tonight, the network had remembered, and that was enough to start the unraveling. The next morning, my inbox filled with the usual project chatter from Marlowe spreadsheets, audit flags, risk summaries. But one notification wasn't from them. It was from LinkedIn. Brian Keller has posted an update. Curiosity tugged at me. I clicked. His face appeared, framed by glass walls and filtered light. Sleeves rolled. Smile confident enough to pass for sincerity. The caption read, "Leadership isn't about popularity. It's about making tough choices. Budget cuts make us stronger. Proud of my team for staying resilient through change." I read it twice. My reflection in the laptop screen didn't smile at first, it measured. He was still building an image while the company's foundation rotted beneath him. I could see the cracks he'd ignored, the expired licenses, the missing audit trails, the systems I had begged him to update. He had called my reports alarmist. I had called them warnings. He hadn't listened. Now, those ignored memos were part of Marlowe's evidence list. I took a screenshot of his post and saved it in the folder labeled Due Diligence Leadership Optics. It would sit next to the clause that could gut his acquisition and the audit gaps he'd buried to pad his quarterly slides. A message pinged from Blake. Blake, need anything from me? Me just context for a man pretending to have control. Blake. That bade me worse. He thinks leadership is a photo filter. Blake's typing paused. Then good. That means he won't see you coming. I leaned back, letting the quiet stretch. Keller's words glowed on the screen, so proud, so hollow. For years, he'd taught people to fear silence in meetings, to fill every pause with compliance. I'd learned the opposite. Silence was leverage. Silence made men like him panic. I closed the browser and opened the next audit file, where truth lived in line breaks and missing signatures. Every sentence he posted was now part of a pattern, another nail in a coffin he was building himself. The man built on optics had just handed me proof of blindness. By Friday morning, the storm had started to circle back toward them. My phone buzzed non-stop old coworkers, private numbers, fragments of panic. Did you hear Keller called an emergency meeting? They're talking about system risks, something with vendor contracts. Legal's losing it. Everyone's whispering about a clause they can't override. I didn't answer. I just watched the messages pile up like static. When the noise finally stopped, a single email slid into my inbox. The sender made me laugh out loud. Sarah Holt, HR, the same woman who had printed my termination paperwork 2 weeks earlier. Hi, Marin. I hope you're doing well. Leadership asked me to reach out and see if you'd consider returning in a short-term advisory capacity. We're reviewing legacy systems and realized your historical knowledge could be invaluable. We truly value your long-standing contribution to Delwyn's culture. Warm regards, Sarah. There it was, corporate desperation dressed up as gratitude. No apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just a clumsy parachute thrown out of a burning plane. I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time, my fingers hovering above the keys. Then I clicked archive. No reply, no closure. Just silence, the kind that says I don't owe you anymore. Another message came in almost immediately. This time from Blake. Blake. They just requested additional documentation on Clause 14. B. Looks like someone finally read it. Me. Let them read. Blake. How's the mood inside me? You'll hear it soon enough. It sounds like panic. He sent a single emoji, a coffee cup. Our quiet code for good work? I leaned back, letting the irony settle. The same people who had reduced me to a line item under budget cuts were now rummaging through my old work, hoping I'd rescue them. In 15 years, I had fixed every fire they started. This time, I let it burn. Behind every frantic message and half-written apology, I could feel it, the shift. I wasn't under their control anymore. They were under mine, and they didn't even know it yet. The meeting started at 9 sharp. My camera was off, microphone muted, name displayed as M, Tilden Strategic Advisor. I watched the grid of faces flicker across the screen. Attorneys, analysts, executives from Marlowe, a few from Delwyn. The air was all polished smiles and polite dread. Blake's voice led the call. We'll begin with the red flag summary. Clause 14B appears to affect multiple vendor agreements. Our legal team will walk through the implications. A document appeared on screen, a risk report marked in red. There it was, highlighted in bold, non-transferable vendor agreements. Clause 14B. I felt the quiet shift in the room, even through the screen. Someone from Delwyn's legal team spoke first. This clause isn't material. It's never been enforced. Blake leaned in slightly. Until now. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Then the square in the corner labeled Brian Keller blinked on. He was late. Of course. The camera framed him, perfectly rolled sleeves, confident grin, every inch of a man who believed the world still bent for him. Sorry, team, he said, adjusting his cufflinks. Busy morning. Let's make this quick. He looked up and saw me. The smile faltered. For a moment, his expression didn't change. It froze, as if the feed had glitched. Then I watched the recognition bloom, slow and bruised. Marin, he said quietly. I unmuted my mic. Good morning. Brian. No one spoke. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath from the others on the call. Blake broke the tension. Ms. Tilden has been advising on contract-level risks. Her insight has been instrumental. Keller's jaw tightened. Instrumental, he repeated. I see. He didn't see. Not yet. But he would. I muted myself again, letting the legal teams dissect the clause while Keller stared at the document with my initials printed in the footer, the same initials he had tried to erase. The first meeting ended with promises to review internally. I ended it with a quiet satisfaction. The woman they cut from the payroll had just become the variable that could cost them $500 million. The next meeting wasn't on a screen. It was in glass. Marlowe's downtown boardroom overlooked Seattle's skyline, and the view was the only thing keeping the Delwyn executives from bolting. Blake started the presentation with a steady tone. Our analysis identifies multiple compliance gaps impacting transferability and valuation. Slide after slide appeared, each one a quiet strike. Licenses expired, audits delayed, vendor rights locked by Clause 14B. My name sat in the document footers, small but visible. Across the table, Keller sat stiff, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles looked bloodless. He hadn't said a word since walking in. The attorneys did the talking for him, throwing jargon like life preservers into deep water. Those clauses were never intended to hinder ownership transition, one lawyer insisted. Blake replied evenly. Intent doesn't change enforceability. They moved to another slide, highlighted in red. 17 critical vendors, non-transferable. Estimated loss, 48% valuation reduction. Keller's voice cracked the silence. Marin, can we speak privately? I looked at him for the first time that morning. No, Brian, everything you need to say can live in the record. He flinched barely. But enough. The next section covered audit delays. For every missing report, a new drop in valuation. For every deferred license, another dent in credibility. The legal team from Marlowe took notes like surgeons tracking vital signs. Keller tried to interrupt again. We can renegotiate these. There's flexibility in... There isn't, I said quietly. Those contracts were written to prevent shortcuts. You signed them. Blake didn't look at me, but his voice sharpened. Given these constraints, Marlowe will be revising the acquisition proposal accordingly. The phrase revising the acquisition proposal landed like a sentence. No one spoke after that. Keller sat back, staring at the projection, the legal language, the numbers, the slow collapse of everything he'd built on borrowed stability. I didn't gloat. I didn't move. I just watched the documents turn page after page for 15 years. I had read men like Brian Keller. Today, he finally realized he'd been written into my book. The deal closed on a Wednesday afternoon. No champagne, no smiles, no speeches, just signatures and the quiet shuffle of papers that cost men their bonuses. Blake ended the call with his usual calm. Marlowe will finalize the revised valuation, effective immediately. The new numbers cut Delwyn's worth nearly in half. The acquisition would still go through, but stripped down no retention packages, no leadership guarantees, no golden parachutes, just damage control. When the last file uploaded, Blake looked over at me. You good? I'm done, I said. He nodded once, not asking more. He knew when to let silence do the talking. The boardroom emptied fast. Keller lingered at the far end, face drawn, tie loosened. His voice reached me like static. You didn't have to do this. I met his eyes. Neither did you. He didn't answer. Maybe there was nothing left to defend. I gathered my notes, closed the laptop, and stood. The same heels I'd worn the day he'd told me to mop the floors clicked against the polished tiles, steady, final. Outside the conference suite, a janitor was pushing a mop down the hallway, humming softly to himself. He paused when he saw me holding the door. Go ahead, ma'am, he said. I smiled. Thank you. He nodded and kept working. The mop, gliding in slow, perfect strokes. The smell of lemon cleaner followed me out. 3 days ago, they had offered me that mop as a mercy. Today, I'd cleaned the place top to bottom without touching a drop of water. Downstairs, the city lights blurred against the glass as the elevator doors closed. My reflection looked calm, almost unfamiliar. For 15 years, I had kept Delwyn Systems running for 3 weeks. I had watched it unravel by its own design. I stepped out onto the street, the air damp and cool, and let the door swing shut behind me. Inside that tower, they were still scrambling to rewrite history, but the book was finished and every word still had my name on it.